Do you feel stuck? Like you're constantly fighting yourself, and no matter what you do, you and your emotions can't get on the same page? That's because you're missing one vital ingredient: validation. Welcome to your crash course for validation. My name is Sean. I'm a mental health coach. I see 40 plus clients a week. I have a 98% satisfaction score from over 1,400 ratings, and I help people to find empowerment in their lives. So today we're going to talk about 8 different things to help you with validation. The first thing is that we're going to define what the heck validation actually is, how to do it. So there's 2 different ways that I like to explain to clients that seems to help them to understand how to validate. So the first way is that it's a 2-step process. Step 1 is to tell yourself that what you are feeling makes sense. And then step 2 is to tell yourself why it makes sense. And if you don't know why, ask. And step 2 is very, very important. A lot of people try out validation and conclude that it doesn't work because they only do step 1. They say, yeah, it makes sense that I feel angry right now. It makes sense that I feel angry right now. But the problem is that when we validate ourselves, what we are actually doing is that we're sort of validating a part of ourselves that doesn't feel heard or understood. And so if we just say it makes sense that you're angry, that part of us doesn't really trust that we really understand. We need to sort of prove to ourselves that we actually understand what's going on by including step 2 of, I understand that you feel angry because X, Y, and Z. The other way that I explain validation to clients is that you are logically explaining what you are feeling and why you are feeling it. Because a lot of times people try to bring their emotions to their logic, try to get their emotions on the same page with their logic. But emotions are just signals. You can't convince them of anything. It would be like trying to convince a nerve that it wasn't feeling pain. Like you put your hand on a hot stove and trying to convince yourself that it's not hot. Like it just doesn't work. You feel pain. And the same thing is true with our emotions. So instead, by doing this process of validation, by logically explaining what you are feeling and why you are feeling it, you are bringing your logic to your emotions. The next really important thing about validation is that validation is not the same as agreement. So a lot of people will come to me and say, well, I don't want to validate this because it's not right for me to do this thing or feel this way or whatever it is. But the thing is that it's not that you're saying that it's okay or that it's right. It's just that you are showing that you understand it. That's the most important part. So let's say that you are talking to somebody whose boyfriend just cheated on them. There's a big difference between saying, yeah, we should go slash his tires versus saying it makes sense that you're angry right now because your boyfriend cheated on you. Another great example of this is I had a conversation with my grandma where we were talking about nationalized healthcare. And she explained to me that she was worried about the idea of nationalized healthcare because she was worried that the quality of care would go down and that wait times would go up. And even though I may not agree with her stance on nationalized healthcare, I can understand where she is coming from. I can understand why she would be afraid of those things. That is the difference between validation and agreement. Now, another important distinction is that validation and reassurance are also different things. A lot of people that I work with have actually I know this sounds crazy, but they've kind of never experienced validation in their entire lives. All that they've experienced is reassurance. So let me explain the difference. So reassurance is saying, no, it's okay. It is trying to convince someone or something that something is okay. So, hey, don't be sad that your boyfriend broke up with you. It'll be okay, which is actually, in a weird way, invalidating. Because if you notice in the way that I said it, I said, no, don't be sad. But the thing is that they are sad. And again, emotions are just signals. We can't reason with them. Whereas validation is saying, hey, this makes sense. It is giving room and space for emotions to exist rather than trying to fix them. And so it's not that reassurance is bad and wrong. Sometimes reassurance can be great. Sometimes people need reassurance. But the problem is that when you start out with reassurance, you rob emotions of their room and oxygen to breathe. And so if you start with validation, You allow for that space. And then once the emotions feel heard and understood, then there is room for reassurance. The fifth important thing about validation is that you are validating emotions, not actions. So for instance, if somebody cuts you off in traffic, it makes sense that you feel angry because somebody just threatened your safety and security and they're not obeying the rules of the road. That doesn't make it valid to then go and, beat them up out of their car, which may be a craving that you have, but just because you have the feeling doesn't mean that you have to take the action. And it sounds very obvious when I talk about it, but in our day-to-day, we actually conflate emotions and actions a whole lot. And when we recognize the difference between emotions and actions, we allow that space for emotions to flow through our system so that they can exit out of our system, rather than them constantly getting stopped up because we're like, no, like I shouldn't think that way, I shouldn't think about that, and it causes all sorts of problems in our mental health. Now, the next three parts of this are all about what happens if I try to validate myself and it doesn't work. These are a few sort of tips and tricks that can help you in navigating when validation is being really stubborn. So the first is don't validate yourself, validate parts of yourself. In order to affect change on something, we have to be separate from it. So as a weird example, like a finger can't operate on itself, right? You need like a separate entity to do the operation. And the same thing is true with our emotions. So if you find yourself really absorbed in your emotions, it's going to be really, really hard to properly validate yourself. Partially because it's really hard to understand yourself when you are sort of consumed by your emotions. And so by sort of imagining this separation between you and the part of you that feels whatever it is feeling, it helps you to almost be like a friend to yourself, which I know sounds cheesy. But by imagining that you are talking to a separate part of yourself, it's a real weird mind trick, but it really does help to give this part of you a life of its own so that you can then be separate from it and work with it. So for instance, I've worked with people in the past that told me that this part of them like popped up and was like, hey, like I need to talk to you. And then like they went and checked in to see what was going on. And that part of them was like, oh, I was just seeing if you would show up. And they were like, did I just get trolled by myself? What is going on? So as you try out this approach, I want to reassure you that yes, it is all in your head. Yes, it is all your imagination. And just like with placebo effect, where, you take a sugar pill, but you believe that it's going to help cure you and it does, the power of the mind is astounding. Now, sometimes when people validate themselves, they get sort of a mid response from themselves. Like they'll validate themselves and the part that they're talking to will be like, yeah, I guess so. And it's just sort of mid. And usually what that's an indication of is that the validation isn't getting deep enough, that there is some deeper understanding that is being missed in your validation. And so what that is a signal to do is that we need to dig deeper and understand more about what is going on. And the best way to do that is by asking questions, by saying, hey, like, I feel like I'm missing something. What's going on? It seems like that didn't land. What else can you tell me about this? All those sorts of questions will really help to get under and get deeper in the validation. And then when you eventually validate, what you do is you include all of that context in the step two, the why you're feeling that way. And in doing so, it hits home a whole lot more. And you'll know that it hits home because you'll have a big emotional reaction when you give yourself that validation. The last thing is something that I like to call meta-validation, which is that sometimes when we validate ourselves, this part that we're working with will kind of fight back. Like it'll be suspicious of us. Like it won't really be on board with us. And when that happens, you can actually validate that response too. So for instance, if you get sort of a suspicious response back from yourself, it's like, yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense that you would be suspicious of me because I've always been so harsh with you. We've always had such like an adversarial relationship that I can totally get why you would be really suspicious. And pay attention to how that part of you reacts. And you can go up as far as it goes. So then if they get suspicious of that, you can validate that. And you just keep going until eventually you get through and you sort of build that trust with yourself. So I hope that this crash course has given you sort of a launching pad into having a better relationship with your emotions. And one thing that I'll say is that we all have blind spots. No matter how good we are at introspection, there's always things that we can't see from the inside. And so I really encourage you to reach out to others and get help and support in this. And feel free to forward this video to someone in your life so that they can sort of get an idea of what it is that you're working on, and who knows, maybe even work on it themselves. And then you two can support each other in that. And if you'd like to talk with me about this sort of thing, I'd love to have a free session with you. I'll leave a link down in the description where you can book a session with me. And if you'd like more help on processing your emotions, this video that'll either pop up here or down in the description, depending on where you're watching this, will walk you through the process of sitting with your emotions and what happens when sitting with your emotions doesn't work. Hope this was helpful, and I'll see you later. Bye.